I grew up here in South Florida. I minister here in South Florida. I've been to other places, I've been whatever, but I don't have contextual experience working in other places. But Tom, my friend and colleague, does. And so from there, I'm going to kick it to him. Tom Carpenter has been with us at the CityChurch Project officially now for a little over a year, but been a friend and colleague in CityChurch Fort Lauderdale, going back in the day when we worked with Phil together. So take it away.
Good. Well, thanks, guys. Like Rick said, before I moved to South Florida, I've been here about 4 years, worked in London, England for about 12 years, and I'll say just a little bit now, but London, England, at least the part that I worked in, had the least amount of Christians and the most amount of Muslims as a percentage of the population in all of the UK. And as probably a lot of you know, England and Europe on the whole doesn't have a whole lot of Christians there to begin with. So it was a challenging context. And so the question is, the question that we ran into is, how do you plant churches where there aren't any Christians? But I think as we begin to look at South Florida, at least in terms of the demographics and trends that we're seeing in light of what Rick mentioned last week, is we're asking actually the same question. How do you plant churches where there aren't any Christians anymore? And so just wanted to take you first off to this general principle. There's a couple missiological principles that I'll highlight. But we'll start out with just the scripture, which is found in 1 Corinthians 9, 20 and 23. And it's Paul talking, and he's wanting people, and this was my desire, so please hear this at the outset. I'll give a few moments for questions here and there. Is that Paul's desire is that no matter somebody's background, is that they come to know Jesus. And that was my desire. But when you go into different contexts, into different cultures, you have to find ways of explaining it to people in ways that they can understand. So here's Paul saying, to the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I might share in its blessings. And so you see Paul saying, I'm going to become like them so that they can understand the gospel. And you see this throughout church history, at least modern day church history, where somebody like William Carey goes into India and translates the Bible into 30 different languages. Incredible. He didn't actually take on the dress you see, actually, well, you don't see it in this picture, but somebody like Hudson Taylor, about 100 years later, goes into China and begins to look like and talk like those with a Chinese background. And so it's this idea of becoming like another culture in order that you can explain the gospel to them. So I was in London for 12 years, and I actually became a British citizen. And I would say that my kids became British in their identity. And so it's a funny story. Some of you possibly have heard of the American Girl dolls. Have you heard of these before? All right, yes, okay. Well, somebody had given us a book of the American Revolution from the perspective of one of the dolls, you know. And I was reading it to my daughter one night, and she was about 8 at the time, and we're sitting there reading it through, and she looks up at me, and she goes, "Dad, we're the bad guys." Because she had become British in her identity. I said, well, and I think this is part of where I'm wanting to push you guys towards, is to say, in some respects, your identity isn't completely in your nationality. Your identity isn't completely in the fact of who you were. In some respects, it's saying you are a Christian first and foremost. This is what we see with Paul. And that, I think, is a motivation for you guys to say, actually, I need to become a little bit more like my local context, whatever that looks like, in order to explain the gospel to people. And so what I thought I'd do here, and I'm hoping at some point there'll be just some time, so I'm going to push the edge just a little bit in the hopes that you might have some response. So at the end of this next little 4 to 5 minutes, I'm hoping that you guys might have some questions. So I think in this context, in Hollywood, this is becoming increasingly difficult because of urban South Florida changing all the time. And so look at Broward statistics. Actually, did I do this one? You know what? Actually, let's go back to that quickly because it does. Here's the tension right here. Let me read Jesus' prayer in John 17. John says, "My prayer is that you not take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world." And so many of you have heard this, that you're to remain in the world, but not of it. And so let's look at this idea of being in the world, especially here in South Florida. So urban South Florida, the Broward statistics, I think, are constantly changing. So you look at Broward, this was not the stats from 20, 30 years ago, and it's shifting in many respects. It will continue to shift. And then you also look at something like Dade. I'm not going to go completely, but you can see what's going on here. Look at Miami-Dade. 30, 40 years ago, this was not the case 30 or 40 years ago. And so here's a case study of something that happened in my context in London, where the French Huguenots, 1700s, were fleeing persecution in France, and so they set up shop in East London, and this building became their church. They built this church building, beautiful church building. But then immigration happens. 100 years goes by, and a Jewish community comes into East London, and this same building, which was a church, becomes a synagogue. 100 years goes by. The Jewish community goes to North London, and a Bangladeshi community moves in. So this same building that was a church, became a synagogue, now is a mosque. The hipsters are moving in. So I think it might be a cafe and an art museum in about 50 years. So, but let me go just a little bit further. There's Cru right here. Cru in Miami, which is Campus Crusade for Christ, they were constantly failing. All right, so they would come into Miami and their team would fail. They would send another team into Miami, their team would fail. And what they realized is that Cru had to go through the process of saying, actually, if we're going to reach Miami and South Florida, we have to take our guys through the same training that we would take those that go into foreign contexts. They're basically saying South Florida is no longer, in many respects, just an American context. It is a foreign kind of context that we have to take the same guys that go through missionary training are having to do that here. And now, actually, 5-10 years on, they're successful. I guess this is where I do see, it's beautiful, actually. I think TJ and the staff here are doing a great job of modeling diversity. Because the church, at least here, if it's going to reach the surrounding communities, actually has to look like the surrounding community. And so, next slide. Your church is going to have to be pretty diverse. That will have to be one of the key marks of your church, is diversity, if you are going to reach the people here in Hollywood. All right, so becoming is a big deal. You have to become like Hollywood to reach Hollywood. I'm going to take you down just another kind of, hopefully a spectrum here of sorts here in a second, but are there any questions, comments, or thoughts at this point? You can raise your hand. I'm sort of hoping that you guys are beginning to feel the tension of how you are going to remain in the world, but not of it. So, if there's no question, yes, good. So good. Yes, go ahead.
Do you have any statistics or know anything about how diverse other churches? I feel like this church is very diverse. Do you have any statistics about churches in general in Hollywood?
I will say that from a church planting standpoint, the fastest way to grow a church is through what's known as the homogeneous unit principle. The easier way to say that is birds of a feather flock together. If you want a fast church quick that can make money and pay the staff bills, you need to make sure that everybody's pretty much the same. That is a fast way to grow the church. I don't think it's the best way to grow a church. And in general, what we're seeing is that those churches that grow fast aren't actually rooting themselves in the local community, and they often die. Often, not always, but they can. Rick, do you know anything about stats related to diversity when it comes to local churches here and how diverse they are?
My expert opinion in the studies that I've looked at is they're not diverse enough. But that's completely opinion and not expert.
Yeah, it's anecdotal at this point. If we had to put it another way, we're not seeing church growth. And maybe one of the reasons that we're not seeing church growth is that the churches aren't doing the hard work. And it is. You see Paul all the time saying, guys, Jew, Gentile, Greek, always he was going down this route of saying you have to be diverse, because that is really symbolic of the gospel being true. If you can get people in the same room together from all different backgrounds, then you know something's going on there. If you get people in the same room that are all like each other, there may be something that's not right, especially when you see a place like South Florida as diverse as it is. So it has to be a mark. Yes?
When you get to the multicultural, especially here in South Florida, there's a lot of different languages. In particular, we have a Spanish service here.
Yeah.
But they meet separately from the English service. So how do you work more to combine those kind of cultures rather than this one group and another group? So just because we meet at the church doesn't mean that we're together.
Yeah, and that's where you have to take. I'm gonna answer the first part of this, and I hope Phil might be able to answer the second part. I think the first part is there is just the pragmatics of somebody doesn't know the language. You have to become like them to teach the gospel to them. I would be saying in a group like this, I hope you're playing the long game, and that you begin to think about not just only the first generation, which may need their own service, but then how you're starting to blend second generation and third generation, so that you're like the surrounding context. Not of it, but in it. Does any kind of, so that's just the broad philosophical. There's first generation, second generation, third generation. Do you want to say anything locally in terms of how you guys are doing that here?
I mean, the thing that comes to mind is our two platforms. One is our ESL ministry, which has been a huge part of the life of this church. So that is literally welcoming and greeting anyone from any background, trying to teach them basic life skills of a new language. And then having a worshiping community that's, reaching out specifically to those who are learning that language, and that's like Spanish service. But I think it's a great conversation piece, down the road, for our church and that church. What does it look like to truly be one congregation?
Okay.
Good question.
Anybody else? All right. So I see. So I was hoping, I have tons of content, but this idea of diversity within the gospel, I don't want to completely pass over it. So I'm wondering if this is just wait a minute, I have something I want to say. I'm just going to go with.
Tom, go back here. Everyone's pointing back here.
I'll make it really quick, I promise.
Okay. Yeah. No.
I'm texting so that I can remember what I'm going to say to you. So it occurred to me last week as well when we were the first the first lesson. Mega churches, the churches that we think, what comes to our mind when we think of mega churches? How does that play in? I guess my question is this. Mega churches, the numbers of people in those mega churches, the thousands that come every Sunday, those aren't necessarily indications of church planting. Is that what you're saying?
All right, so it's a different type of church plant, and so this is just me, guys, being as, I think, positive about mega churches as possible. But generally, those are based on what's known as a network principle, where they just say, to be honest with you, we have a great preacher, we have a fair amount of space, and what we can do at this point is likely reach out to, I would say, 30 square miles. So where you have people traveling in upwards to an hour to get to that megachurch. I'm not in any way disparaging it. I'm just saying that that's the reality of it. And that their target market generally is about, in this context, 1.5 million people. So for them to draw 2,000 people to a specific location is based on the fact that they're usually reaching low-lying fruit. People who are seeking, hungry, willing to drive, want to be discipled. It is a model of church planting. In some ways it can be reasonably effective and fast because of them just saying, we're just going to reach 1.5 million people. And I have a good feeling that they're going to be able to find 2,000 people that want to come to one location. Versus it's effective in some respects versus the idea of, I think Park Road is a good example of a local church reaching local people. And if you have people driving in upwards to half hour to 45 minutes to this location, praise God, TJ's a great preacher. But in some respects, I would say that may be their place for a time, but you want as many local people here reaching their local neighbors and having an incredible impact in this area. So it's just two different models. Network versus neighborhood is the kind of the way I describe it. There's more questions. I mean, should we just stay on this idea of diversity? And,
Keep going with it. I'm going to grab some internet issues anyway.
There was a question over here.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, you were hitting on the idea of being in the world and not of the world.
Yes.
And you're seeing more and more in the media about these big churches accepting and embracing alternative lifestyles that would be sinful in the Bible. How are you guys addressing that?
It's a really good segue. Actually, I'm going to talk about that next. But I want so thank you. You're just jumping ahead. You're asking the question that probably people are wondering: how do we remain in it but not of it? Anything else regarding the diversity before I move on? Yes.
Yeah, I would like to ask, how would you compare the model that you were working with? I'm thinking of the first megachurch.
Yes.
Going back, and with 3,000 people converted, Holy Spirit here, but 3,000 people. Also a history, totally diverse, more diverse. Jerusalem at that time, more diverse than it is today. Can you borrow? Do you build anything on that? Do you? I mean, of course, the Lord is doing this. God is doing it, but do you draw from that, or do you draw from other models?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say to that specific moment in time for the church in Jerusalem, as you saw 3,000 people saved at that moment, is that they were reliant upon 400 years of seed sowing, and then Jesus' ministries to get to a point where you were seeing that type of fruit. In many respects, a church like this and others, I think good local churches do the hard work of being a great neighbor, of being present in their neighborhoods, versus always reliant upon the fruit of low-hanging fruit, which I think that needs to be. All churches are necessary. I'm probably of the persuasion that the most effective church is one that's local and present and engaging in a smaller group of people over the long term, if that makes sense. Yes.
What did it look like
living in the world and not of the world in your church in London, given the demographics of the area?
Yeah, so I'm gonna, boy, this is, do I need to just kind of skip over? Gosh, it's a good case study. I just don't know if I have time.
That's a big question.
I know. All right, I'm gonna skip over a kind of a philosophy of ministry, and I'm going to give you the case study first. I'll discuss with Rick whether it's worth bringing this up next time. So I'm actually going to go to, can you?
London slide?
Yeah, the London slide. I'm going to just give you a bit of my story and how we did it. I'm not necessarily saying that this is the way to do it. I'm saying it is a way to do it when dealing with a community that is becoming increasingly secular. So again, London, so I was here in this little circle right there, and like I said, fairly large Muslim population, and so if you were to look at their timeline is probably 40 years of seeing large-scale evangelistic revival. I was at year 15 and needed to leave. I was tired. But I think it's going to take another 25 years of consistent seed sowing, of providing another alternative, of showing them the gospel, of saying that you are saved by grace and not by works. All right. So kind of moving on. So how do you do it? How do you start relationships when they were so closed? So, for instance, to even start relationship, we had to start a cafe. We couldn't say, hey, please come to a Bible study and to a church service and to Christian programming, because that would have been so alien to them, because in essence, we had to become like them, because, I give this example, I've said this before, but it's a big deal converting nationality. For me to become British, for them to suggest that they might become a Christian is just, it wasn't going to happen. Not anytime soon, unless they were forced. But it would just be so foreign. So if we go back to this faith spectrum or this belief spectrum, it's just how do you get people in the 1 to 5 even engaging with you, thinking that you are probably a part of, they thought I was Mormon and a part of a cult for a long time. I was like, no, I'm a Christian. But it's just to say, we started it based on an economic exchange. And so just daily, this went for 20 years. Pandemic has closed it down for 20 years. Every single day, serving coffee. And even for those that weren't Muslim, it was amazing this one moment where over the course of 6-7 years, we discipled their kids. The kids were involved with Christian programming. But a girl said one day, I think I'm going to come to church. And so we held church in the same building, where it's just like, hey, you could come on a Sunday to church. You come here Friday for coffee, come here Sunday. And she said the day she came to church, it was the scariest day of her life, because she was becoming something else. We became like her, and she was becoming like us. And the kickback she got, though, from her whole entire community was, you're becoming one of them. Did you see this idea of becoming? How it's a huge deal. So we ran a cafe. That was one way. Lots of missionaries that go into local contexts, and at least Africa, India, China, they would have started hospitals and schools. Well, at least in London, we had great hospitals, great schools. But there was a local park that was disused, run down. There was 2 murders in the park. And so we approached the local government and said, we'd love to get the lease on this building. And we ended up starting to run a little cafe there, which was amazing because, for instance, I would drop my little daughter off at school, and I would be surrounded by these Muslim families, and I just couldn't even make eye contact with them. Not even like a friendly, good morning, nothing, just angry. But there came a point where the local community, and I would say thousands of people, started to recognize, because we had regenerated this local park, you can kind of go on, we brought it back to life. It was now safe to go into the local park when we were there. So there was this one moment where this lady who would never look at me, our kids played together in school, and it was a hot day. And I served slushies at my park. And I had a corner on the market. And the little boy wanted a slushie. And I happened to be behind the counter at that point. And there was just this moment of humanity based on the economic exchange, where I was able to say, she was able to say, "I'd like a slushie." I says, "It's really hot." And just that moment of, it is really hot. And we became people to each other in that moment. It's beautiful. Really was beautiful. And it was those year on year, thousands of exchanges, coming to this park cafe, getting food, running parties, that normalized relationships over the course of years. And I would say that there was one other thing I would say that was funny, football outreach. These guys, the Bangladeshi Muslim community, could not play football with each other. They would always get in fights. And it was weird. It took 8 years. The Muslim men would never talk to me until this moment where we were able to unlock and say, this guy started running football programming. We funded it. And now all of these Muslim men became my best friend because I provided football for them. If I post anything on Facebook now, they're like, "We really miss you, Tom." Which is, it's amazing. So these guys, and there's just this thing of just we became friends, where there's this moment of saying, I love these guys. I love the Bangladeshi community. They were no longer scary. They were no longer, these kind of quote unquote enemies. They were my friends. And if you can begin to do that locally and unlock, when you start to say, gosh, this one particular community, they drive me crazy. It's like, no. That you become like them. And this place, which I think is pretty diverse, could become even more diverse. And the gospel would be here. It's tough. It's really tough. But it's beautiful when it happens. And I would say on another level, this is just one other example. A lady came in and started Christian charter schools, which was incredible for our area because it allowed Christian families, because I would say this is part of the strategy of just saying you have to be multi-generational and think beyond just the short-term fruit. It allowed for Christian families, which, praise God, I was able to leave, but Christian families are staying and raising their kids in that neighborhood, a part of this Christian school. And it's diverse. So 50% Christian, the other 50% are outreach. So you can have Muslim families in here. It's outreach oriented, but it's keeping Christians in the area. So all of these, and so kind of back to your question, all of these different outreach programs, which it took years to sort of figure out what would reach into these. How would we start relationship? I love Bible study, but generally you have to start further back in terms of how are we going to start relationships with those that are seemingly far from Jesus. And I guess that's the question that this church community will begin to have to ask every single day, really. Well, not begin, continue to ask. In light of the changing demographics, as we saw, that the demographics are always changing. But I would say in general, we're not winning across South Florida right now. Church is in decline. I think this is a good place for new things to happen, and I hope they do. But ultimately, in the end, all of these things we did, everything that it wasn't just I wanted to make people feel good about themselves. It was towards this. I wanted them to be a part of a local church. So this is our local church, diverse, a local church for local people. Said over and over again, and so just so that there's a bit of present day fruit. This was sent to me last week, and this is like almost tears. Some of these guys were born just as the church opened. And here they are, a part of a young adults group in our church, in our neighborhood, who have come to know Jesus because of the efforts and because I would say they saw that the church was plausible. People have to like see it actually happen. Not only diverse racially, but diverse generationally. They have to see that there's this living, breathing, not just on the internet. I'm sorry, like, come to church, guys. All right? Come to church. Stop doing church on the internet. Come and be a part of a local church, a local expression of the church. Living, breathing, you're actually practicing the fruit of the Spirit. You can't be joyful by yourself all the time. You definitely can't be patient just by yourself. You're patient when you actually interact with other people. They saw it. They saw Jesus in community. And now they're Christians. And I have a feeling that they are going to raise their children in the faith. And their children will become Christians. London on the whole is actually turning the tide a little bit. And it's possibly, and they're saying it's down to a lot of people moving into London from Africa and Asia. And the last part of this little bit of fruit I'll say is, City of Peace is becoming more Chinese. It's becoming Chinese because they're moving there because of the banks in that area. And City of Peace was just diverse enough to be able to accept people from all different backgrounds. It just happens that right now, the Chinese are very open towards the gospel. Praise God. All right. I have this really, if I had an extra half hour, I have something that would answer the question of in the world, but not of the world. But
I think we have enough time.
How much time do we have?
20 minutes. 12, 13 minutes.
I think you should just do this next week. Can you do it next week?
Yes.
Wow. I want you to be able to kind of process this, and like if I leave, it'll be like, wait a minute, I have a lot of questions now. It might be a little bit more. I'm hoping we can just tackle this in the world, but not of the world's next week. Are you going to come back next week?
Yes.
Okay. Oh man, they're coming. Hey, that's right. That's good. All right. So we have about 10 minutes. I have one kind of two final slides, but I want to make sure I open up for any other questions, comments, thoughts, or even feelings. We'll throw feelings in there. Yes.
So running down the aisle, going to a church service, and then there's an altar call. And people run down there and they pray. And I'm not disparaging it, but that's not all it is. I mean, from what you're saying, it's hard work.
Yeah.
It took you, 8 years you said, before you began seeing fruit? So I'm just not convinced that having a church service, having these people go down, say a prayer, unless there's serious follow-up, I don't know that that's... First of all, it's not even scriptural. It's not. I haven't, unless they can correct me, I don't see a time in the Bible where people just go down to the altar, say a prayer, and it's always at the front of the church. I've never understood that. Why is it going to be at the front of the church? But I think from what you're saying, it's being a Christian is just way more than that. And it takes time. That woman that finally said to you, I want a slushie, it took years for that moment to happen.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that going down the aisle and saying, I believe in Jesus, it can be good, but it's not always an indication of what's happening.
Yeah, and so I don't want to be disparaging of any other church in their model. I just want to say I think it is a model that can be effective for a time, but employing, I think, especially in a post-Christian environment, this idea of people can belong to this faith community, and that's a hard thing for you to say. They are completely different from me. I mean, Phil used to work and minister in Wilton Manors. I live in Wilton Manors. That is a huge challenge to say their background is incredibly different from mine, but they can belong here before they believe. And that's something that you'll have to process. But it is one of the more effective ways of saying we as a faith community allow people to belong, because we know the process of becoming takes time. Yes?
Just based on what you were saying about your time in England, how much of because there is this huge influx of Muslims coming in, right? So how much of the British culture, is it the case that Muslims are assimilating the British culture, or that British culture in essence is starting to assimilate the Muslims? And that's an important question, I think, if you're supposed to become like you're suggesting. And if it's the case that these cultures become more sort of influenced, it used to be traditionally that people assimilate their culture. Your example of the football slide that demonstrates that.
Yeah.
But how much is it the case that the parents think one way and the kids think another? I mean, so how much is that? Because the answer to that is going to depend on what it means to become like the world, right? So there's less of a tolerance there in that traditional framework coming from that worldview.
Yeah, and I don't think it's an easy answer, So yes, there is a large influx of those from a Muslim background moving into England. I would still fundamentally try not to, and I would say this idea of becoming, and please hear this, it's easier to build a brand if you use black and white language versus saying, they're my friends. And yes, fundamentally they are part of something that's opposed to the Christian faith, but they're my friends, and I'll play the long game and allow the Holy Spirit to move versus saying it's us and them. And so I know I'm possibly not answering the question directly, but indirectly I'm saying they're my friends, and I love them. And they may win in the short term, without going into, because this is being filmed, isn't it? I want to be careful what I say about different faiths if it's broadcast online or something. So, yes.
Have you ever personally been challenged with what I'll call the elephant in the room, kind of on what you're talking about? So it's acceptable, but using your email coming to church example, it's acceptable for her to become a Christian, but we all know it's not acceptable for our Christians to change and become a Muslim. And so there's this tension all the time of like, we want you to become, but we don't want you to.
Yeah, I would say at my core, please know, I want everybody in the room, no matter their background, to follow Jesus Christ. And so please know that that's the intent. And so by the end of my time, the whole belonging motif was beginning to, they were beginning to love us, and they see that we love them no matter what, to where we were starting to see when there was genuine need, they were coming to church services, and they were coming to things like Christian retreats. So no, from our standpoint, look, I know that your works and your works-based faith is only going to take you so far. You need to believe in Jesus. So, and we were pretty open about that, but we were patient.
That's not hey, people say you're so great, but yet, the whole tolerance of today, I think they call it tolerant, right?
Yeah. Yeah, tolerance, in my opinion, is really almost the opposite of love. If I just tolerate you, I don't love you. So I did challenge that. Yeah. I know these are really. I wish we had more time. We could go get coffee and talk about this, because these are great discussion points. But I'm almost out of time, right? Is it time for me to wrap up? I have two final slides. Last question. Yeah, go ahead.
How's prayer life or your relationship with God has helped you with your mission in helping people come?
The idea of, how did my spiritual life impact what I did, at least then and now. To be really honest, guys, frontline ministry in that context was really tough. It was really tough, and I burnt out after about 12 years. I think I'm 4 years back, and I'm better than I was. But there were rough days. So, and I would just say that, and I think that's a good segue into just these kind of two final slides. That type of ministry in a post-Christian environment, it's tough. And that's where, in some respects, you do have to highlight the black and white. That it's not necessarily us against the Muslims, but there are spiritual forces that can wreak havoc on your life. So just maybe these two quotes to finish, and we'll be done. And this is the length of time of becoming. I'm not reaping the harvest, and this is a missionary in Iran. I can scarcely claim to be sowing the seed. I'm hardly plowing the soil, but I am gathering out the stones. And that may be, in some specific contexts here in South Florida, you won't see real fruit and harvest for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, but gather out the stones. And then finally, this is Hudson Taylor. Man, he was awesome. Unless there is an element of risk in our exploits for God, there is no need for faith. And so we're heading into uncharted territory, and you will have to take risks as a faith community and as individuals to see this area come to know Jesus. Amen? Amen. Hey, let me pray for us. God, thanks so much for today, and God, thanks for your goodness to us. God, I pray for this church, this faith community, and the people here. Thank you for encouraging them, drawing them into this place, a place where they can live the Christian life, not as just as individuals, but as the body of Christ. And so I pray, Holy Spirit, you would come, give them new ideas, enable them to take risks when it's appropriate, and help them to love their neighbors. In Jesus' name, amen. Good. Good. Thanks, guys.